ludicrous funding crisis that we've been going through during the pandemic?
My Lords, I live in London. I have a 60-plus Oyster card. I was a TfL board member for eight years. I was Deputy Chairman for half of that time. I have great affection for Transport for London. Nobody would want to see a long-term settlement for it more than I do. But in fact, as the noble Lord Adonis has just explained, it is impossible to put a long-term settlement in place at the moment. There is sometimes a comparison drawn with the train operating companies who have been funded. They, of course, are agents politically, constitutionally, legally of the government. The difference is that TfL, politically, legally and constitutionally, is an agent of the mayor. And to understand the government's anxiety about entering into a long-term settlement with the mayor, one needs to have some forensic understanding of his financial responsibility over the last 4 years. He was elected in May 2016. The pandemic hit in March 2020. That's almost exactly 4 years. Those are the 4 years I want to concentrate on. Before the pandemic even hit, he came into office with two dangerous pledges. One was a fares freeze at a time when public transport was heaving with people and there was money for him to collect. The cost of that fares freeze over a 4-year period he has accepted was £600 million. £600 million foregone. He added to that the hopper fare on the buses, allowing people 2 rides within an hour. TfL budgeted £35 million per annum to fund that, to find after a year that there were 100 million usages at £1.50 a pop. Now, that's a top figure. TfL won't give an estimate. It is the case it's a bit complicated. Some people might have hit the daily cap. Let's be generous. Let's say it was only 130 million a year foregone. That's another 600 million over 4 years. That's 1.2 billion he left on the table in the fat years. The result was the subsidy to the buses, which hit 600 million under Ken Livingstone and was brought down under Boris Johnson to 450 million a year with no loss in bus mileage, has rose before the pandemic under Sadiq Khan to £750 million a year, with a 7% cut in bus mileage to go along with it. His second pledge was that there would be no strikes on the underground. That is a very easy pledge to fulfil, though expensive. You just give in to the unions. And until very recently, that is exactly what he has done. One consequence of that has been a considerable growth in the number of tube drivers. The system needs about 3,000 as a minimum to run. When I last looked before the pandemic hit, there were in excess of 4,000. Let's say 1,000 excess posts at roughly 50,000, maybe 60,000 now a year. That's 200 million a year over 4 years. That brings us up to 1.4 billion foregone. Now, to his credit, he did embark on a reduction in management headcount, but given the generous severance packages negotiated by unions, it takes several years for TfL to see the cash flow benefits of that come through. On Crossrail, there's very little to say given the time. He was totally surprised and shocked, according to his own account, when it blew up in his face, because he'd taken no interest in it up to that point, presumably. Now, of course, from the mayor, from his own resources, could not have coped with the pandemic. Nobody is suggesting that even if that £1.5 billion or so was in the bank waiting to help him through, that he could have got through the pandemic, the length we have seen it, without government subvention. But it is very hard to discern how he has faced up to the hard choices that this sudden and possibly continuing loss of income has had on TfL. There is a lot of pleading for money from him and very little leadership, and this is consistent with his behaviour in the fat years. My noble friend will have her own view, but having myself struck long-term deals for TfL with, amongst other people, the noble Lord Adonis, who has just spoken, and with Conservative governments, I can well understand the difficulties the current government has in doing so now.